welcome back to another video. I hope you guys are doing well. I wanted to do a video today about the difference between a veterinary technician and a veterinary assistant. I get a lot of people asking me if, doing the veterinary assistant program through whatever college is worth it for them and what's the difference. So I thought a perfect way to explain that would be to do a video on it, because there's a lot of different sides, there's a lot of information, and it's kind of hard to explain because it all depends on what your main goal is and what you want to get out of veterinary medicine. So to begin, a veterinary technician is licensed. In most states, you cannot call yourself a veterinary technician unless you are licensed. This includes places like California, Virginia, New Mexico, Colorado, I believe Nevada, I'm not 100% sure, and Washington as well. You might see credentials like LVT, CVT, or RVT. Those all essentially mean the same thing. Of course, the only difference is the word in the beginning. You have licensed veterinary technician, certified, and registered. They are all licensed with their state. So in order to have those letters at the end of your name and to consider yourself a veterinary technician, you need to be licensed with the Veterinary Board of Medicine within your state. For a veterinary assistant, the veterinary assistant's job is going to depend a lot on what state they're in. So in some states, they are a lot looser with regulations, and they might not require veterinary technicians to be licensed. If this is the case, then you don't necessarily need to go to school in order to be licensed. You don't necessarily have to pass the VTNE or do any of that groundwork that you would have to do to be a technician. But if you do live in a state that has a lot more strict regulations, then you will be doing a lot less than the veterinary technicians as far as skills. So you might not be drawing blood, you're not going to be placing catheters, intubating, anesthetizing, doing any suturing, doing any bandages, doing any wound care, things like that. You're not going to be doing that because you're not licensed. It definitely does vary state to state, and you can always go to your state's veterinary medicine board and see what the veterinary technicians restrictions are, so what only veterinary technicians are allowed to do. So each state has one of those, so you just look it up for whatever state you're in. And some states will also allow veterinary assistants to do very similar tasks as veterinary technicians, but not necessarily call themselves a veterinary technician, if that makes sense. So when I lived in California, I was doing things like intubating, monitoring sedations, monitoring anesthesia, drawing blood, placing IV catheters, administering subacute fluids, everything like that. I was doing that on the job, but I wasn't a veterinary technician. Here in the state I live in now, you're not allowed to draw blood, you're not allowed to place IV catheters, you're allowed to monitor anesthesia, but you're not allowed to do a lot of other things. So it's definitely changed my perspective a lot, because at the previous place I worked, I felt like I was doing the job of a veterinary technician, whereas now I am finished with school, I am finished with taking the VTNE, and I am now actually licensed. So I am actually a licensed veterinary technician now. I understand that there's a lot that I thought I was doing that I wasn't really doing the best of my capabilities, if that makes sense. So a veterinary assistant can definitely monitor anesthesia. They can, graph the trends. They can check and see what, like if the patient's light or if the patient's too deep, and monitor different vitals and know the normal vitals and everything. But unless they go to continuing education conferences and spend a lot of time devoting themselves to educating themselves outside of work, they're not going to know why a pet might be panting if he gets a certain medication, or if a animal's eyes are ventral while they're under anesthesia, if that means that they're light or if they're deep, or if certain drugs affect that. They aren't going to know how certain parameters might affect each other, and looking at that as a big picture, and then they aren't going to be able to have a bigger picture of the patient under anesthesia, and that's only one thing. A lot of other things that I've seen and I've done personally is that I was physically capable of taking x-rays as an assistant at the last place I worked, and the assistants were able to do them by themselves. They didn't need to have a technician present, they didn't need to have a doctor present, everything was fine. And I would take x-rays, and I would not collimate the field down as much. So I wouldn't really crop the edges. We weren't very, they weren't very diligent, or I honestly wasn't as careful with keeping the gloves out of the shot. If I had to hold the dog or hold the pet and the edge of my glove was in there, like sometimes I didn't crop that out if the doctor didn't want me to or didn't have a preference. So things like that, I didn't know why I wouldn't do that. I didn't even know that that was a problem. So like learning how to do things with the least amount of radiation possible, exposure to you, but also the patient. The fact that the gloves only block about 25% of the primary beam, they're only meant to protect you from scatter radiation. So there was a lot of things I was doing that were not safe for me, that I didn't even know, because I didn't know the exact information of which I was doing things. So I definitely think that switching states made me appreciate that more and understand that from the other side more, because you don't know what you don't know. So when you're an assistant and you're doing the same things a technician is, and you're like, oh, like I can do these same things, I'm basically a technician, you really don't know that at the deepest level what information you're missing, because you don't know that information exists. So I think that's one of the biggest differences for assistants versus technicians for me that I've noticed and that I've experienced personally. And I can 100% admit that I thought that I was essentially a technician basically a year ago when I moved here to Virginia. And I was like, yeah, like I've been working as almost a technician for about 2 years. Like I feel confident, I feel good. And within this past year alone, I have learned so much. And I know that you always learn as you move through things, but I learned, like the biggest lesson that I learned was how much I don't know and how much I have to learn still. Even though I'm licensed now, I still have so much to learn and so much to become more confident in, and so much to improve upon myself and my own skills as a technician. And I don't think that the license is what makes someone a technician necessarily. I think that the amount that they devote to their care for the patients and the amount that they devote to educating themselves and getting the most recent, most up-to-date, most ethical information possible, I think that's definitely what sets veterinary assistants aside from veterinary technicians, is that as a veterinary technician, you have to stay up with CE, you have to have that baseline information. Even if you don't go to school to be a veterinary technician, you still have to pass the VTNE. You still have to pass the same things that people who have gone to school need to do. So at some base level, you're still having to learn more information than you would as a veterinary assistant. So that's one of the biggest reasons I see that's one of the biggest things that sets veterinary assistants apart from veterinary technicians. And another thing is that when When clients have very specific questions, a veterinary technician is going to be better able to answer those questions as opposed to a veterinary assistant. Because if a client asks about a very random question about a diet and the carbs in it, and well, like this food has this much fiber and it's a grain-free diet, can I feed this? The veterinary technician is going to know a lot more about nutrition and a lot more about the different nuances of whatever disease this patient's got and all of these different things. They're going to have a lot more information about each one of those things individually, so they're going to be able to have a bigger picture of the answer of this question better than a veterinary assistant, if that makes sense. It's incredibly complicated, and it definitely varies from person to person, from state to state, and I don't even know what it's like out of this country. I'm just talking about within the United States. But of course, you're going to meet veterinary technicians who have gone to school and done all of their due diligence and they're licensed, but they don't know very much clinically at all. And then you're going to meet people who are not licensed and people who, have not gone to school, but they still know an enormous amount of information. And I think just taking what you can from each one of these different situations is going to be the best for you. As far as whether to go through with getting licensed and pursuing licensure, pursuing becoming a veterinary technician versus an assistant, I definitely think it depends on two things the most: whether or not you want to commit yourself to veterinary medicine, whether or not you think this is something you want to spend the rest of your life doing, and what state you live in. So if you are thinking about pursuing assistant school and getting a certification, it's not going to be a degree, it's just like a working certification, showing that you went to this program. If you live in a state like California where you can learn most of that stuff on the job and get paid for it and not have to pay a program in order to learn it, then it's definitely something worth considering. If you live in a state that's not like that, let me back up. If you live in a state like California where you can learn everything on the job that you would be learning in an assistant program, then maybe that's not the right fit for you. If you are in a state like that, but you can't get your foot in the door and you know that you want to be in veterinary medicine, but you don't know if you're quite ready to commit to doing a veterinary technician program and you haven't had experience in it, then I would definitely recommend doing a veterinary assistant program, because it's going to give you a lot more information so that you can come in and say, hey, like, I don't have physical experience, but I have completed this program and I would really like a chance to, do my skills and become a good assistant and help with, supporting the veterinary technicians, supporting the veterinarians, and showing that you do know a little bit of something related to veterinary medicine, because it can be really hard to get your foot in the door. And I'm going to make a whole nother video about trying to tweak your resume and trying to present yourself in such a way that encourages the people you're interviewing with to give you a chance if you haven't been in veterinary medicine before, but you're very passionate about it. The other reason I would recommend doing a veterinary assistant program is if you live in a more strict state, like the state I live in, where the assistants don't do very much blood draw, they don't do like blood draws, they don't do IV catheters, they monitor anesthesia, but giving sedation, things like that, they're not going to be doing. So essentially the competition for veterinary assistants is going to be higher. The amount of information that the veterinary assistants are going to need to learn is going to be different. You can still learn those things on the job that the veterinary assistants do in stricter states, like taking vitals, asking questions, going through soaps, like assisting the veterinarians, certain things about like sterile fields and instruments and patient records and normal vitals and things like that. You can definitely still learn on the job, but it might be more difficult to get a job. And you can definitely do one of the veterinary assistant programs, because it'll give you more information under your belt essentially, and you will also be more likely to get a job if you have a veterinary assistant certification. I believe there is a entity that you can get, like take a test and get like a certification as a certified veterinary assistant. It's not like a nationally recognized thing, I don't believe, and it's not a state recognized thing, so you don't get your license like you do as a veterinary technician. Veterinary technician has to apply through the state that they live in and that they reside in for a license, or to become like registered, certified, licensed, all of those things. But a veterinary assistant, it's more of just like a separate entity that you can get approved through. So I believe you sit for a test and you have to pay for the test and pay for the certification, and then you have like a certificate saying that you're a veterinary assistant, but you don't necessarily need that to be a veterinary assistant, if that makes sense. You can learn just on the job. There's not the same sort of rules as if you are a veterinary technician. That means you are licensed. You don't have to be a part of that certification for an assistant, if that makes sense. It's all very complicated, and it's different in every state and different for every program and every hospital, so it varies so much. But I hope that some of the information I went over kind of allows you to understand the difference a little bit more, because it can definitely be confusing when you have no idea what you're getting into and you have no idea about very much within veterinary medicine. So I totally understand that it can be very confusing and frustrating, especially when you know you want to work with animals but you don't know how to get your foot in the door. I hope this clarifies some, and I'm sorry if I went a little ranty. I feel like I did, but this is talking about the difference between assistants and veterinary technicians is something that I wish more people did. So I have a little bit of a hard time separating my feelings from the straight facts, and of course, because it's so complicated, it's all intertwined, so it's hard to individualize each thing about the differences. But I hope this helped. If you guys have any questions about this specific subject or anything else, please don't hesitate to leave it down in the comments below. Thank you so much for watching another video, and I'll see you guys next time. Bye bye.